Welcome to our event on Biden and Asia, different views on human rights. We have a terrific lineup today, moderated by our own Asia Society COO, Tom Nagorski, who is joining us from headquarters in New York City. We have over 300 people signed up for this event, including several colleagues from our center in the Philippines. It's really important to us to bring you quality content and experts from around the world. Since shelter in place, our team has hosted 189 speakers, and those speakers have come to us from 17 countries and regions. Today, our audience is diverse with varying viewpoints, just the way we like it at Asia Society. So we ask for participants from home to engage with us, share your views, and let's keep this dialogue respectful, please. We have an hour for this program. We'll finish at 6 p.m. Pacific. This event is on the record and we are recording. Our format for today, I'll introduce our moderator, Tom. He'll introduce our panelists. They'll have a moderated discussion, and then the room will be opened up for audience Q&A. So if you have a question for any of our speakers, put them in the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. Tom will be monitoring that throughout the program. Now, a few words about Tom Nagorski. He is our EVP and COO at Asia Society Global. Before this role, he spent 3 decades on the front lines of journalism as top management and editor at ABC News. He's worked in Russia, Germany, and Thailand. He's won 8 Emmy Awards and a DuPont Award for his work. And he's also a writer. He has a book out, Miracles on the Water, the heroic survivors of a World War II U-boat attack. Tom, thank you very much for doing this. It's terrific to have you with us.
Thank you, Margaret. And thank you especially for the book plug. I didn't see that coming, but I appreciate it. And we appreciate all of you joining us from across the global network. This really is an Asia Society global event. I mean, Margaret is in California. One of our guests is in California. We have a guest in Seoul, South Korea. We have a guest in Manila. I am in Brooklyn, New York at the moment. Wherever you may be, great to have you with us on this Asia Society platform for a very important conversation. Human rights surface often in our global programs, in our conversations, but it is rare for us to devote a full hour to the issue as we will do today. As Margaret said, it's a broad look at human rights issues in Asia at the moment and how those issues are being addressed or perhaps not being addressed in these early days and months of the Biden administration. And like so much of what we cover across Asia, the matter of human rights is hardly monolithic. It's not a one-answer-fits-all question. At minimum, we will take a deep dive today into 3 very different geographies, each with their own human rights concerns of the moment, with 3 people who are superbly suited, perhaps uniquely suited, to tackle those questions. So you probably have seen the biographies. I'll do snapshots here. But to get to the introductions, John Kamm is with us, Chairman and Executive Director of the Dui Hua Foundation, active for more than 3 decades now on behalf of prisoners inside China. John was awarded the Eleanor Roosevelt Award for Human Rights by President George W. Bush in 2001. And since he first intervened on behalf of a Chinese prisoner in May 1990, so not long after the uprising in Tiananmen Square, John Kamm has made more than 100 trips to China to engage the government there in a dialogue on human rights, focusing on the treatment of prisoners. Several hundred of those prisoners on his lists have been granted clemency. Professor Yanghee Lee joins us from South Korea. She served as the UN Special Rapporteur on Human Rights in Myanmar from 2014 until 2020. And before that, she served at the UN Committee for the Convention on the Rights of the Child for 10 years, including 4 years spent as its chair. She is the recipient of many honors for her work in the human rights space, including the Order of Civil Merit, the highest recognition given to a civilian for work in the human rights field. And Theodore Te, Ted Te, joins us from Manila. He is a human rights attorney and former Chief Public Information Officer at the Supreme Court of the Philippines, formerly served as a vice president at the University of the Philippines, and he is a member of that country's oldest human rights lawyers group, and has represented the journalist Maria Ressa, who has been, by the way, a guest in our Asia Society online platform. He represented her in various cyber libel cases, including her most recent appeals. Ted Te has extensive experience in human rights advocacy and litigation, freedom of expression cases, and current litigation that is now challenging the Philippines anti-terrorism law. So as I said, three terrific guests to tackle our questions and issues today. As Margaret said, we'll have a conversation for a little over a half an hour and then open to your questions. And you know how to ask those through the Q&A box. I thought, Yanghee Lee, if I may, I would start with you. In part because your expertise is in Myanmar. As I said a moment ago, just a year ago, you stepped down as the UN's top official watching over human rights in Myanmar. And of course, for the past 4 months or so, we have been watching what I think can only be described as a real deterioration of the overall situation in that country following the coup that took place in the first days of February. Really the first crisis in Asia since Joe Biden took office. And so perhaps you can begin, Yanghee Lee, by bringing us up to date on the situation in particular, the state of play in terms of human rights in Myanmar at the moment. Yanghee?
Well, thank you, Tom. As you said, it's been about 4 months. Next week will be the 4-month mark since the illegal coup was attempted. And the coup has not succeeded yet. We have to remember that. The situation is deteriorating day by day, but the people who are participating in the democracy movement is unrelenting, and they are regrouping every day amidst indiscriminate shootings, arbitrary arrests. And, we have a whole slew of human rights violations that are currently happening under our watch. The situation there is at a stage where we hope that it will not progress where there will be a long drawn out civil war in the entire nation. As you know, there's been 70 years of civil war in the ethnic areas. We do not want to see that happen unless the international community starts to act quickly and with urgency and with principle. And I think the people in Myanmar deserves a lot more, and they've been asking the international community for assistance, which the international community has been dragging their feet so far. And we are reaching monsoon season, and this is going to create more problems amidst COVID-19 pandemic. And I really think that the international community must start to act immediately.
So, Yanghee, can I press you a little bit? You said, use the words with urgency and principle. Just last month, several of the nations of ASEAN gathered to address the issue. I think it was the first real international effort to do so. And they issued a 5-point statement. There were calls for restraint, for dialogue, and so forth. I take it you would say that wasn't the urgency and principle that you were looking for, but I shouldn't put words in your mouth. What more is needed?
Well, we've seen that the UN has been playing a little bit of a ping pong game with UN and ASEAN. And ASEAN has been dragging their feet. But, it's already been a month since the ASEAN leaders meeting where Min Aung Hlaing, the chief commander, was present. And he was there when the consensus was drawn up. But when he returned, upon return, he just said he kind of undermined the whole process of the ASEAN process and said that they will not, pretty much, that they're not going to abide by the 5-point consensus. Mm-hmm. And ASEAN has not yet appointed a special envoy, which I thought would have been the first priority for ASEAN to do, and to go into negotiations or dialogue, for that matter, with Min Aung Hlaing to reduce the violence. We say that in the 5-point consensus, or even in the meeting report, that it was for all parties to reduce the violence. But we have to remember, it's a unilateral violence committed by the junta, not both sides. There are no parties to this. It is unilateral violence.
Okay. One more question about Myanmar before we move to the other parts of Asia that we're going to cover here. A consortium of, I think, more than 200 civil society organizations got together around the same time and then responded in the wake of the ASEAN statement that we've just been talking about to say, basically, that's not enough, as you have just said. Specifically, they said that an arms embargo was necessary. And I think they described it as the minimum necessary step. Talk for a moment, if you would, about, first of all, is that the right move? Would it be a good move, in your view, to address some of those rights issues? And if so, why hasn't it happened?
It is very important. Not just heavy arms, but we have to include the dual-use objects in this arms embargo. Right now, some people would say, well, there's plenty arms, weapons inside Myanmar for the junta to use. But I think that this way, it will put a lot of pressure on the junta in terms of relooking into the amount and the degree of violence they are inflicting on its people. Why hasn't it happened so far? Well, we have to remember China shares the largest proportion of arms sale to Myanmar, and second is Russia, and other countries follow. And this is one of the reasons, or maybe the key reason, why this universal arms embargo has not been able to reach a consensus in the United Nations.
Okay, Yanghee, we'll come back to you in a moment. Let's go to Manila now, and Ted Te, who, one thing I didn't say in the introduction, Ted, is you've been a fighter. You've been a fighter for a free press, or a freer press, because of course the Philippines has, compared to some other countries in the region, has a pretty robust set of free media. But for a freer press, and in particular, a fighter against extrajudicial killings, which have been on the rise, the killings of lawyers and judges in the Duterte era. Give us an update, as I asked Yanghee to do with Myanmar. Can you give us an update of where those issues and other rights issues that are front and center for your work stand in the Philippines at the moment, if you would?
Yeah, thank you, Tom. And you're right that the current issue, I think, involving human rights and civil rights protection in the Philippines really focuses on the increase in extrajudicial or extralegal killings since this current administration took over in 2016. Of course, there were EJKs, as we would call them here, in previous administrations, but there was a spike that came up when the new administration took over in 2016, primarily because of the war on drugs, the war on illegal drugs that the government pronounced very, very early on. And this has spawned so many consequences. First of this would be, again, the increasing killings. The second would be the opacity, the lack of transparency as to the number, circumstances of the killings. This currently is under litigation now in the Supreme Court, where two groups, the group I represent, FLAG, as well as another group, have asked for the Supreme Court to declare as unconstitutional the current war on drugs. That's currently under litigation, but the important thing there is that the Supreme Court has basically asked the government to give information, which is something that we were never able to get officially through channels, as to the number of killings. The difficulty here, Tom, is that no one is absolutely sure as to the number of killings. All we know is that there have been a lot of killings, and the killings have spiked. The number, the circumstances under which they were killed, of course, the official account of the police is that these are vigilantes. These are not attributed to us, but it's difficult to validate all of those, especially when there have been public pronouncements and speeches from no less than the president. directing, for example, police officers to kill, directing law enforcement people to to take these kinds of actions, and so that would probably be the first. As to the official numbers, again, very difficult to actually say, but based on I think what the PNP, the Philippine National Police, have actually acknowledged, there have been close to 2,500, if I'm not mistaken, which have been attributed to police killings in this particular administration alone. And one thing I must point out is the increasing insecurity on the part of human rights defenders, which would include lawyers. The Free Legal Assistance Group, the group I represent, noted the spike in killings. 61 lawyers of various persuasions, including judges and prosecutors, have been killed under this administration, 2016 alone. And so that's the environment that we're operating under right now.
Now, Ted, just on the matter of the police, I know it's not really a new thing. He has said this before, but the President Duterte has said that, and I think speaking directly to people in the human rights field, such as yourself, please don't confuse, rogue police with police who are just doing their job. He says often that it's hard being a policeman. There are a lot of bad elements around the country, and I'm paraphrasing here, but don't punish policemen for doing what they signed up to do. What do you say when you hear that?
Well, we have no problem with recognizing the legitimate police work in relation to law enforcement, peace and order, but when there is lack of transparency, when we can't figure out what is legitimate police work and what is illicit work that results in these killings, and especially when there are orders that are given from the very top, and orders which are not contradicted, orders which are not officially denied, then it becomes a problem for us, because even if the police consider themselves civilian in nature, they generally recognize the president as the commander-in-chief. So when the president speaks, that's an order. And so it becomes very difficult to parse out the statement. So one of the things that has been very significant about the current administration is that the policies are given usually in speeches, and they're not usually written down. So the speeches get later on get confirmed, but people listen to the speeches, and when they hear something like that, it makes the headlines first, and then they become policy, as it were, when it becomes translated into an official document. So when the police hear that, many would take it as, okay, those are our marching orders. And so we have seen that. We have seen instances where the police have actually killed people. There is one significant case where a police officer shot an elderly woman and her son in full view. There was a video taken of that. That police officer has been charged, and that kind of culture has been perpetrated simply because of the orders that have been given. And so, many people have been reminding the administration, the president, that his words matter, and that he should be a little bit more circumspect about what he's saying. But that's his brand, and unfortunately his brand translates into this kind of culture. So we have no problem with recognizing police when they do the legitimate law enforcement work, peacekeeping work, but we have to also hold accountable these police officers, and to do that we have to start by finding out what exactly happened.
Yeah. One more question for you, Ted, before we move over to John Kamm in China. I actually have not looked lately at Rodrigo Duterte's poll numbers, but I believe it's fair to say he has been a popular president. How much does it complicate your work and the work of your colleagues in the human rights space when the leader is, for whatever reason, whether it has to do with the issues you're talking about or not, when they watch him and they listen to him and they support him?
You are right, Tom. It is very, very difficult. It complicates matters. It complicates discussions on human rights. When, for example, when people are unwilling to concede that the president can do no wrong. When people say, well, he's popular and we accept him, he's still the president, and so they're willing to hold accountable those under him. They're willing to criticize anybody under him, but once he speaks to the greater majority, those in the lower socioeconomic classes, they do still regard him very, very highly, and it becomes very difficult to advocate for accountability. It's very, very difficult to talk about human rights, to talk about protection of these rights when the president is able to absorb everything into his poll numbers, into his popularity, and to his acceptance numbers, and they're very, very high. They've been consistently high, even if other members of his cabinet, for example, would not be so popular. He himself personally remains very, very popular.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. Let's go over to John Kamm now in San Francisco. John, it's great to have you with us. And as I said at the outset, you have been active in the world of human rights in China and prisoners' rights in particular for the better part of 3 decades. Recently, you said something that caught my eye, and you may not be the only one who's expressing this statement, but you said, quote, "Rarely has the work been more difficult." I wonder if you can start by explaining what you mean by that.
Well, thank you, Tom. Yes, it's quite difficult now. There have been other difficult periods, but this period is exceptionally difficult for a number of reasons. First of all, within China, we have the 100th anniversary of the Communist Party establishment, which was 1921. And the focus of the top leadership, by which I mean Chairman and President Xi, is very much on stability. They're very concerned that there may be incidents that would disrupt this anniversary. That's one reason. Another reason has been the situation in Hong Kong. As you probably know, the National People's Congress at the end of June last year passed a national security law for Hong Kong that is now in effect. And that has raised a lot of concerns internationally. And China is pushing back strongly with respect to those concerns. So there is definitely a domestic element and there's an international element. The present situation is difficult, but there have been other difficult periods. And during this time, I'm still in regular contact with the government. They still accept my inquiries on prisoners, and they give me responses in writing. So, yes, it's difficult, but there have been other difficult periods, and I'm actually reasonably confident this will pass. At the moment, though, the international pressure on China is very strong. Even today, the Senate has I haven't checked over the last few minutes, but it's on the verge of passing a very big bill that while it is largely focused on technology and economy, there's a very big human rights component to this. And I'm sure this will raise hackles in China. There will be backlash. The United States has sanctioned individuals and China has retaliated. And by the way, one of those retaliations has apparently led to the suspension of the EU-China investment agreement, which is rather significant. So, yes, these are tough times for human rights in China, and I'm happy to go on about this, but
maybe if I can pick up on something you said that struck me, John, because I think it's an unusual view, and you bring so much history to the table here. But you said you think this will pass. We hear a lot of different views at the Asia Society from all corners of the spectrum about China and the U.S.-China relationship and so forth. I'm not sure, lately anyway, that I've heard too many people with what sounds like at least somewhat hopeful view for the future. So tell us a little bit more about what gives you at least that kernel of optimism.
Well, without hope, what do we have? Well, what do I derive hope from? Well, first of all, I want to say something about the topic before us. Biden and Asia, different views on human rights. I think we need to distinguish between views of governments and views of people that the governments represent. And as it stands right now, differences between the U.S. and Chinese government on human rights are very pronounced. I'm happy to go into details, but anyone who followed what happened in Anchorage on May 18th knows the differences on human rights are deep. And yet, and I was fascinated to listen to Ted on this, views on human rights among the people are not so different. And that is the foundation of hope, for better or for worse. Example, the United States and China practice capital punishment. We're outliers. The two countries are outliers. Most countries do not practice capital punishment. The United States and China do. And there's great popular support for capital punishment. Okay, so that's one point. There are other similarities between the two people that we don't see, for instance, in similarities between China, Europe, and the US. Example, religious freedom. You know, China and the United States are actually very religious countries. You don't see that in Europe. You cannot say that the Scandinavian countries are religious countries. But in China, China is the fastest growing, call it a market, for Christianity in the world. And it enjoys all kinds of religious groups. I'm doing a study on this right now. Mm-hmm. There are millions of Chinese who are practicing various kinds of religion. And the United States, of course, is considered quite religious. There are other similarities. So I think it's important, and again, as you could see with what Ted was saying, the views of the populace with respect to extrajudicial killings in the Philippines may not accord with international opinion, but that's the reality on the ground. Yep. So I do think we need to keep this in mind going forward. And in fact, if we could change the opinion of the Chinese people and the American people on human rights, our road would be much easier.
Well said. And by the way, John, just before, in case I forget, whenever you're done with your study of religion in China, please come back to the Asia Society and talk about it. I'm sure it'd be super interesting. One more question.
Actually, I'm very happy to do that. By the way, I'm doing a study on behalf of the European government, and the European government wants me to distribute our findings.
Good. Well, I'm
very happy to do that.
One more question for you before we go on to a more Biden-centric conversation. You have been a practitioner of what you call a respectful approach towards this issue with the Chinese. And, you know, I don't know that it's disrespectful, but we know, those of us who've watched this issue in the United States for a long time, particularly when we watch political campaigns, for example, China bashing has become just a thing we see almost every political season. It is actually, you know, there's not much bipartisanship in the United States right now, but antipathy towards the Chinese is a pretty bipartisan issue. Explain, if you would, for our audience, John, what you mean by taking a respectful approach towards China and how that manifests itself.
Okay. So I guess a couple of years ago, I was in Beijing and the American ambassador asked me to address a group of 12 other ambassadors about how I do it. My secret sauce. And one of the points was be respectful. Don't attack individuals. Direct your criticism to policies. That's one way. There are many other ways. For instance, when you ask about a prisoner, which I do all the time, I have asked about thousands of prisoners, I ground my inquiry in Chinese law, open sources. So when they say, oh, where did you get this information? Did you get this from some NGO? And I said, no, I got it from your own judgment website. That's respect, you see. So it's a total approach to how to discuss human rights violations with a big, powerful country. I could go on this, but there are a lot of elements to this. Focus on policy, not individuals. Use Chinese law. Cite international law, but use Chinese law. Know your Chinese law. Know the law on how you get somebody out of prison on medical parole. Mm-hmm. I have to tell you, our diplomats, the U.S. diplomats, don't have a clue. They don't have any idea what kind of illnesses qualify one for medical parole. You got to know that. It's a 400-page document. You got to know that. So, that's sort of it. Right now, I have open inquiries on almost 30 prisoners. Mm-hmm. I expect to receive information on several of them over the next few days. And one of the other things I want to point out, which many people somehow don't get, sometimes when I am told by a Chinese official that someone has been granted clemency, they rejoice. Mm-hmm. They are happy. Mr. Kamm, I have good news for you. Yep. So-and-so has been given a sentence reduction. Mm-hmm. They're happy about it. And that speaks to the fact that both peoples, although both peoples, I should say, are pretty tough, do the crime, do the time. Yep. At the same time, they support humanitarian treatment of prisoners. And on that, I rest my case.
Well said. Okay. Let's come to the broader issue of human rights generally. And as John said, the title of this program about the Biden administration and their approach. And we'll go in the same order. I'll come to Yanghee first here. But it seems fair to say, and I'm probably generalizing overly here, that for Donald Trump, when rights were an issue, they were usually transactional, about raw U.S. interest. For Joe Biden, at least in a stated way, and his national security team, perhaps more about values. But I'm curious to know whether it's pertaining to Myanmar, the Philippines, and China, or just generally. Again, starting with Yanghee Lee, whether you see or have seen any real practical differences or policy differences to this moment. Yanghee, why don't we start with you?
Thank you. I really don't know what Biden's policy is towards Myanmar or to other parts of the world, especially the world that I live in and the region. But there are differences that I can see because, unfortunately, President Biden was thrust into the coup on February 1st, and he was forced to make very quick decisions. And I think he has made the right decisions in terms of sanctioning more targeted sanctions, which I've been calling for, that there has to be three cuts approach to Myanmar. One would be cut the arms supply. The second is cut the financial supply. And the third is cut impunity for Myanmar, and the junta included. Let me just go back, if I may, to pre-Trump, when Myanmar was opening up, and the whole world was very excited. And I was very disappointed when Obama administration in his very last days or months had lifted many of the sanctions that were in place. And that, to me, raised some concerns. And then when the Trump administration came in, there was really not a proactive or even reactive approach to the situation in Myanmar. First of all, when in 2017, when the genocide was occurring, and after genocide had occurred, Trump administration did not choose to label it as a genocide, where everyone would say that, and I've called it as a hallmark for genocide at that time. But right now, the Biden administration, I think what he needs to do more is to look at, from a human rights approach, which will be the same as he approaches other parts of the world, with no exceptions, with no differences. It would be great if this administration will have, your current administration will try to convince companies like Chevron, who is a tremendous supplier to the Ministry of Gas and Energy in Myanmar, which is now fueling the supply, the financial supply to the junta. It was a great decision by Biden's administration to sanction MEC, Myanmar Economic Company Corporation, and Myanmar Economic Holdings Limited. The tactics have changed, and there's another recent development that I would be very interested to see how Biden's administration will react to, is now that they have an American citizen who's a journalist from Frontier Myanmar who's arrested. Previously, there was a Japanese journalist. Now that the tactics have changed in Myanmar is arresting foreign journalists, foreign high-level media outlet personalities. Previously, they've been arresting human rights defenders and even lawyers. Recently, you saw pictures of Aung San Suu Kyi and U Win Mint and Myo Aung, the former Naypyidaw mayor, in the docks. We saw those horrendous pictures of the three of them in the docks. After that hearing, Myo Aung's lawyer was arrested. Charged now. And so the issue with human rights defenders, including lawyers, journalists, and physicians, and students and other people who are participating in the democracy movement.
I think actually, Yanghee, you've not only answered my question, but I hope this is for Rebecca Enoch, who is in our audience, asked a question about what should be done. And I think you've answered Rebecca's question as well. Rebecca, come back to us if you don't think you got your question answered. Let's go now to Ted Te. Same question I originally asked Ted. What sort of, obviously the Philippines is a great U.S. ally, has been for a long, long time in the region, in part sometimes as a bulwark against China. I think that goes for both countries. But on human rights, what do you see thus far, if anything, in terms of practical or policy changes, Trump to Biden?
Tom, you're right. The alliance between the Philippines and the U.S., of course, is a long-standing alliance. It's a strategic alliance. But in terms of the shift, if any, I think it's not yet there. I mean, I don't see it. I don't see a very specific focus in terms of this current administration, in terms of human rights in the Philippines. I think most of the focus really would be on trying to secure the status of the current visiting forces agreement, which the president basically suspended. I think 2 years ago, when the former administration, when Congress, the U.S. Congress, I think barred one of the senators, his former police chief, from traveling to the U.S. because of complicity in extrajudicial killings. But there really have been no significant pronouncements from the Biden administration in terms
And can I just jump
protection
in
of
there?
human rights.
Sorry,
Yes, go ahead. No.
Can I just specifically ask you what specific pronouncement or policy or action from the Biden administration would you most like to see?
Well, maybe where the United States stands, for example, in terms of protecting, as Yanghee mentioned, human rights defenders who would basically be raising issues regarding the war on drugs, extrajudicial killings. I take note of the act of Congress in protecting, for example, or inquiring about the status of a detained Senator De Lima, who currently is detained and standing trial based on charges relating to her alleged complicity in the drug trade. That has spawned some fallout in terms of some of the president's trusted assistants. But there really hasn't really been much said about protecting rights in terms of even expressing any concern for these things. So I'm not sure if it's still it will come in a matter of time, but historically, when the U.S. makes a pronouncement of concern on these things, the Philippines does react, and it's not something that we generally like to see, but I mean that's a matter of history. When the United States expresses a concern on something relating to human rights in the Philippines, the government here tends to react.
Thank you, Ted. So, John Kamm, over to you. Now, of course, it's a different situation with China because, after the initial Donald Trump, Xi Jinping, whatever that was at Mar-a-Lago early on in the Trump years, hardly a day went by, especially in the pandemic period, where the president didn't criticize the Chinese for one reason or another, but I don't know that human rights was top of mind for him. How do you view Joe Biden and his team as different in this area, if they are at all? And what would you like to hear from them or see from them in the days and months ahead?
Well, Tom, the ground is shifting under our feet as we speak. I didn't look over the last few minutes, but it appears that the Senate is poised to pass a very big bill, the Innovation and Competition Act, that is, while it is focused largely on technology and economy, there are big human rights components. For instance, it establishes a $10 million fund to promote democracy in Hong Kong.
Yeah.
Okay. We don't know what the administration view is on that particular piece of legislation. It passed a procedural vote with 68 to 30. So
you're right. By the way, John, I'm doing something I should never do as a moderator, which is look at my phone. But you're absolutely right, and this is
has it passed?
It is going on as we speak. It is on the brink of passing. $195 billion.
So there you go, Tom. Of course, we don't know what the administration position is on this. If it passes with a veto proof, oh, by the way, there's another bill in the House, etc. If all this comes together and it passes by a veto-proof majority, I suspect the Biden administration will do exactly what the Trump administration did. with the Hong Kong Policy Act, the Xinjiang Acts, the Tibet Act, and they'll sign it.
Yeah.
So it's really, we're right in the thick of it.
But this is by and large, right? I mean, this is at least the bulk of it is a competitiveness with China, right? I mean, it's about technology, it's about business, and I guess it has couched in there some of these rights questions. Am I right?
Well, yes, you're right. But those human rights questions actually, as far as China is concerned, are at least as important as the other things. I mean, you got $100 or $200 billion on scientific innovation. I think they're more concerned about sanctions. There's a whole sections on sanctions, Hong Kong. And that, if signed into law, will have certainly an impact. I think the main thing that we're seeing now, and this is nothing new, it's well articulated, the policies between the administrations are, strikingly similar. The Trump administration, in its last days, called what's going on in Xinjiang a genocide.
Mm-hmm.
And Secretary Blinken has affirmed that.
Yeah.
The Trump administration said that Hong Kong does not deserve special privileges. And the Biden administration has agreed. Both administrations' policies are strikingly similar.
So let me jump to an area where their policies are not similar, and it goes to a question that's also come in from the audience, which has to do with the power of the American example. And here the issue is, and I think I'd love to get perspective from one of our two guests who are in Asia, either Ted or Yanghee on this, which is the suggestion that some Asian nations, whether they are close allies or not so much, have gone after the United States because whether they look at the ban on Muslims in the Trump years, treatment of immigrants generally, and they are able, whether they are being sincere about this or just opportunistic, to say, look, you're not one to lecture us on these things. And so why don't I come to you, Ted? I'll just pick on you. Did the United States lose any credibility in those years, or not really, as a paragon or a commenter on rights issues because of things that went on here?
I would agree that the U.S. did lose some standing in terms of being a voice for protection of human rights because of those policies, because of those positions. I mean, of course, in terms of, again, I would agree with what John said earlier, that I think a distinction needs to be made between government and people. And even among the people, you would probably need to further segmentize that. But many here would really view what the U.S. government's positions would be on certain issues. So if you're looking at the U.S. government's position, for example, on immigration, on equality, on non-discrimination, religious freedoms, we do tend to see the U.S. government as basically a voice on those things. And so, yes, I think that the U.S. did lose some standing on those issues when they implemented those positions, like the Muslim ban, immigration, for example. In the Philippines right now, there of course has been a very strong pivot towards China, primarily because of this current president's, I think, personal position and personal relationship with China. And so in terms of the U.S. trying to catch up, I think that's what people are seeing now. The U.S. is trying to cement its former role. And so in terms of perception, there has been a change, I think, in terms of how the people view the U.S.'s position or stand or voice in terms of human rights protection.
I would agree with Ted and John. U.S. has lost its credibility in my part of the world too. And when U.S. left the Human Rights Council, that was another indication that U.S. was really not standing for the values, the universal values of human rights. It was being another opportunist country. But with this new administration, your new administration, returning to the Human Rights Council is a good signal for us. And excuse me, and to the other UN agencies, such as WHO. And if I may, hopefully, I think Biden's administration could engage in some thought about returning to the Rome Statute when President Bush unsigned it. I think this would be a clear message that U.S. is now back on the global fora on upholding and promoting human rights and justice for all.
Thank you, Yanghee. And we have a question for you that goes to another person, another world leader, who I'm not sure we know exactly where she stands right now on the human rights spectrum. I'm going to let you take this. Aung San Suu Kyi, who you mentioned in your opening remarks, for so long. I'll date myself and tell you that in 1989, I met her in her villa just before she was put under house arrest when I was a journalist. And for so many years thereafter, she was a dissident, a prisoner, a paragon of human rights, Nobel Peace Prize winner, and so on and so forth, roundly criticized by that same rights community for quite some time recently for siding with the military, not speaking out against the Rohingya and other issues. And now she seems a victim again. Help our audience to understand what are we to think on that broad spectrum of the human rights question, the democracy question of Aung San Suu Kyi.
I have no doubt that her heart was in democracy. And we can say that she could be the fighter, the champion of democracy for Myanmar. But I strongly question if her heart was in human rights for all. Her heart, I think, I've known her before she was state councilor and after. Her heart was in the human rights for the Bama population, the majority population, not for all of the other ethnic populations, let alone the Rohingya. We have the Karen, the Karenni, the Mon, the Shan, and the Chin. And so I really don't think she was the beacon of human rights, but she was a champion for, or a fighter for democracy for Myanmar.
Okay. We have a really good question for John Kamm. John, this is you could write a thesis on this one, but here goes. It's from David Ruff. He writes, I think the respectful approach, that's the term you've used, John, is a good one. Can the United States show more respect towards China by being more forthcoming regarding the sins of our past? Examples including our treatment of Native Americans, our part of the 19th century slave trade, so on and so forth. Would this perhaps reposition the United States discussion with China away from a seemingly moralistic criticism?
Thank you very much. Well, I would focus on, let's go right to the nub here. There are 9 international human rights treaties, 9, and not counting the optional protocols, 9. The United States has signed and ratified 3. China has signed and ratified 5. Neither of those performances are very good. What I would rather do is to, they talk about challenging and cooperating, competing. I would rather see the United States, since Joe Biden opposes the death penalty, to come out and say the United States no longer supports capital punishment. Now, that will challenge China to do the same thing. You follow me? Yep. And that's what we should do. we should compete with China on human rights. We shouldn't just criticize each other. We should say, here's where we are both outliers on capital punishment. Mm-hmm. We are both outliers. Why doesn't the United States take the lead and say, we no longer support capital punishment. We will sign on to optional protocols and challenge China to do the same thing. That's how you do it. Mm-hmm. That's how you do it. You just don't criticize China. You provide a way forward. And the way forward here is for the two countries to sign on to internet. Okay. The United States has signed and ratified the Convention on Political and Civil Rights. China has signed and ratified the Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights Convention. We should each sign and ratify both. Mm-hmm. And we should work together to do that. That's how I feel, anyway. That's real competition in human rights. Not confrontation. If you want to make a difference, figure out a way to cooperate. I have done so. I know it's possible.
Thank you, John. And by the way, my apologies. I've had a light blowout here, but it's okay. You know what I look like. You don't need to see me in broad light here. Last question goes to Ted Te in Manila. It's probably a mistake to focus on individuals. I'm going to double the error here, having just asked a question about Aung San Suu Kyi. I'm now going to ask a question about another woman we mentioned at the outset, and that's Maria Ressa. But she has been, a real pioneering reporter, journalist. Her organization, Rappler, as well. And I don't know how many times she has been hauled into court and all that. Give us a sense of where you think, because you've worked to defend her, Ted, is she going to be okay, do you think? Does she just have to live this crazy cat and mouse game for the rest of the way? What's your take on her future?
Of course, as her lawyer and as a longtime friend of Maria, I'm hoping for the best, of course, for her, both legally and in all other aspects. But currently, she and her organization, Rappler, has about 9 cases, if I'm not mistaken. And 3 of them are directed against her personally. These are cyber libel offenses related to her work as a journalist. And I think she has been singled out primarily because she and her organization, Rappler, have been very, very consistently critical of the policies of the president. And so there is a view that she has been made an example of in order to deter other journalists, other people who would want to freely criticize the president. And to a certain extent, it has worked. The Rappler and she personally have been demonized online. She has been trolled incessantly. And so these are some of the things that we're working against, not just the legal aspects, but even those that affect her work as a journalist and as a person. So, of course, we do know that should this current administration change, well, we have elections in 2022. If there is a new administration that is very, very different from from this current administration, we're hoping, of course, that some of these issues that are really not founded on facts or the law would go away. But right now we are defending her the only way we can, which is in court with as much evidence as we can, with the support of, I think, a lot of people even outside the Philippines, with journalists, with press freedom groups that have come in to support Maria. But she's okay, I think.
Thank you so much. We're going to need to leave it there. Ted Te, Yanghee Lee, John Kamm, I thank you all so much. Really great insights all around from your 3 vantage points. Let's turn it back now to Margaret Conley. I'm Tom Nagorski in Brooklyn. Margaret, over to you.
Thank you very much, Tom, John, Yanghee, and Ted. Lots covered today on Myanmar, China, and the Philippines. Ted, do keep us posted on Maria Ressa. She has come to speak at our center out here, and our thoughts are with her, and we'd like to have her back here. Thank you again to our center, Joy Alampe in the Philippines, for helping us spread the word about this event. And for our audience, Asia Society is hosting virtual programs around the world. You can find our global list of events at asiasociety.org/online. We're hosting them around the clock in whatever time zone you're in our audience today. If you're not already a member, please do join us. These global programs are free for members. And as a nonprofit, we really appreciate your support so that we can continue doing the work we do. To track everything that we're doing, please follow us on Instagram and Twitter by using the handle @AsiaSocietySF. And if you are joining our VIP reception, this is for our speakers, our board, our innovator and groundbreaker members, please click over to the second Zoom link that was sent to you right before this program. A big thanks to our team, Rexel, Paularp, Jamie, and Michael, and from all of us at the Northern California Center, stay safe.